The Miller home sat at the edge of Maplewood Drive, a sleepy street in New Jersey where porch lights flickered off around 10 and nothing much ever happened. Lawns were clipped, hedges squared, neighbors predictable. It was the kind of place where people left doors unlocked, where safety felt like a given, until that stormy night in October when the illusion shattered forever. What really happened to Emily Miller, age 4, abducted from home? Who's behind the shocking disappearance? We're about to uncover the truth. But before we dive deeper into this mysterious tale, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you enjoy gripping stories filled with suspense, twists, and emotional depth, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Rain fell in steady sheets, hissing against pavement, ticking against windows. Inside the modest two-story house, Karen Miller bent over her daughter's bed, tucking a quilt beneath her chin. Emily was 4, small for her age, with blonde hair that curled when damp and eyes that seemed too large for her face. She was still restless, still curious, even as sleep tugged at her. "Mommy," Emily murmured, blinking up at her. "Will it rain tomorrow too?" Karen smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Maybe, sweetheart. But rain is good. It helps the flowers grow." Emily giggled, a soft sound almost swallowed by the patter of water on glass. Within minutes, her breathing slowed, the way a child slips easily into dream. Down the hall, Mark Miller locked the front door, then checked it again. He did the same with the side door, then the back, then the windows. Always 3 times, always careful. He didn't know why he felt on edge that night, only that he did. Maybe it was the storm, maybe the flicker of the street lamp that seemed weaker than usual, or maybe it was nothing. Still, he couldn't shake the sense of being watched. When he finally crawled into bed beside Karen, the clock read 12:47 a.m. outside, the storm deepened, thunder muttering low across the sky. The neighborhood slept. Lights out, curtains drawn. But at the far end of the yard, near the shadow of the pine trees, someone waited. A figure stood cloaked in darkness, rain dripping from a hood, gloved hands flexing. They had studied this house, watched its rhythms, waited for the right night. And tonight the storm provided cover. They moved silently across the wet grass. The side window near Emily's room was the weak point. Old wood swollen with years of humidity, latch stiff, frame loose. The gloved hand tested it once. Twice. On the third try, the latch gave with a soft metallic sigh. Inside, Emily stirred. A draft brushed her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open, catching the faint silhouette against the glow of her nightlight. "Mommy?" she whispered, voice small, uncertain. But it wasn't Mommy. The figure loomed, carrying with them a smell that didn't belong. Sharp, chemical, artificial. A cloth pressed against her face. Emily's muffled cry barely escaped before it was smothered into silence. Her small limbs jerked, fought, then grew limp. The figure lifted her, swift and practiced. The blanket slid to the floor, forgotten. In less than a minute, the room was empty. The nightlight buzzed faintly, illuminating nothing but a hollow bed and a window swinging wider in the wind. The house remained quiet. Karen shifted in her sleep but did not wake. Mark rolled onto his side, sighing. The storm swallowed all sound. And by the time the car pulled away from the curb, its headlights off, its tires whispering over rain-slick pavement, Emily Miller was gone. Karen woke with a start, though no sound had stirred her. A mother's instinct, sharp and unexplainable, told her something was wrong. Her chest tightened before her mind could even form the thought. She slipped out of bed, padding barefoot down the hall. Emily's door was ajar. "Emily?" she whispered. No reply. Karen pushed the door wider. Her heart dropped. The bed was empty. The blanket lay crumpled on the floor. The pillow was still warm. Her gaze snapped to the window, open, curtains swaying in the cold draft. Rain speckled the sill. Her scream ripped through the silence. "Mark!" He bolted awake, stumbling into the hallway, heart slamming. When he saw Karen's face, white, trembling, he knew. "She's gone." Karen cried, her hands clutching the frame of the door. Mark lunged past her, searching the room. "Emily? Emily?" His voice cracked. He shoved his head through the window, rain splashing his face. The yard was empty, the street deserted. He turned back, frantic. "Call 911. Karen's fingers fumbled with the phone, sobs breaking her voice as she tried to speak to the dispatcher. "My daughter, my baby, she's gone. Someone took her." Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed against the wet houses. Neighbors stirred, faces pressed to windows, whispers spreading. Police officers swarmed the yard, shining flashlights across mud and grass. Tire tracks curved faintly away from the curb. One neighbor swore they saw a dark sedan speeding off, though the rain blurred the plates. Another thought they heard barking, but no one could confirm. Inside the Miller home, the air was thick with panic. Karen clutched Emily's stuffed rabbit to her chest, rocking back and forth. Mark paced the living room, fists clenched, veins taut. Detective Samuel Ruiz arrived just before dawn, raincoat dripping, eyes sharp and tired. He'd seen abductions before. He knew the statistics. But when he looked at Karen and Mark, broken, pleading, he silently vowed this one wouldn't become just another cold case. Outside, the storm began to break, gray light stretching across Maplewood Drive. Inside, the Millers' world had collapsed. Emily was gone. And though they couldn't yet know it, the ripples of this night would stretch across a decade, shaping every breath of their lives until the truth finally clawed its way to the surface. The abduction was only the beginning. The storm eased at dawn, but inside the Miller house the chaos only deepened. Rainwater pooled at the base of the side window, soaking into the carpet. Muddy prints tracked faintly across the sill where the intruder had slipped in and out. Every detail screamed intrusion, violation, absence. But the only thing Karen could see was the empty space in Emily's bed. By 7 a.m., the street was lined with patrol cars, floodlights, and uniforms. Officers combed the yard, bending low with flashlights, marking tire impressions, bagging a scrap of cloth half hidden in the grass. A K-9 unit arrived, dogs straining against leashes, sniffing furiously, then whining as the trail vanished at the curb where a vehicle had pulled away. Karen sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, trembling, the stuffed rabbit pressed tight against her chest. Her voice was hoarse, words tumbling over each other as she recounted every detail to the officers. Bedtime, the storm, the window she thought had been locked. "I checked it, Mark checked it, he always checks them all," she kept repeating. Mark stood at the kitchen table, jaw locked, answering questions in clipped tones. He looked as if he'd aged 10 years overnight. His fists clenched whenever an officer suggested possibilities he couldn't bear to hear. Detective Samuel Ruiz observed everything quietly before stepping in. He was in his 40s, tall, with deep-set eyes that carried the exhaustion of too many late nights. But there was an alertness in his gaze, a determination that made him stand apart from the uniformed officers. "Mr. Miller," Ruiz said carefully, "you mentioned locking the doors and windows last night. Did anything feel off? Any sign of tampering before?" Mark exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know. Maybe I was paranoid, maybe I wasn't. But I remember the latch on Emily's window sticking. I thought I got it down." Ruiz's eyes flicked to the open frame. Sticking means leverage. Someone may have known it was vulnerable. Karen's head snapped up. How would they know? Who would know? That was the question echoing across every wall. Who? By mid-morning, news vans crowded Maplewood Drive. Reporters shoved microphones at neighbors, cameras zoomed in on the Miller's house draped in crime scene tape. 4-year-old girl abducted from her bedroom in the middle of the night, one anchor intoned gravely, her umbrella barely shielding her from the rain. Police are urging anyone with information to come forward. The story hit the morning cycle hard. By noon, Emily's school photo, taken just weeks earlier, her smile toothy and uneven, flashed across television screens statewide. Amber alerts pinged on phones. Drivers along the turnpike saw her face on digital billboards, a plea glowing in the rain. Missing child, Emily Miller, age 4. Last seen Maplewood, New Jersey. Tips flooded the hotline. A dark car in a parking lot, a woman carrying a child in a blanket, a scream overheard near a rest stop. Each call had urgency, each carried hope, but most led nowhere. The Millers gave statements again and again. Officers pressed. Did they have enemies? Custody disputes? Financial conflicts? Was there anyone in their circle who might wish them harm? Karen shook her head through tears. We're normal people. We don't fight with anyone. She's just a little girl. Mark grew defensive. We don't owe anyone money. We don't have secrets. This was random. But the hardness in his voice revealed what he feared most, that maybe it wasn't random at all. Detective Ruiz studied them both. He'd seen families crack under the first 48 hours of an abduction. Spouses turned on each other, friends were accused, skeletons surfaced. He watched their every glance, their silences, filing away details. At the same time he felt something different here. A raw grief that wasn't performance. Karen clutched Emily's stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. Mark's knuckles were raw from slamming the table in frustration when questions circled back to them. Ruiz stepped outside to the swarm of reporters. He raised his voice over the buzz of cameras. We're asking the public for vigilance, he said firmly. Anyone who saw suspicious vehicles between midnight and 2 a.m. in the Maplewood area, especially a dark sedan, contact our hotline immediately. Time is critical. The words carried weight, but Ruiz knew the truth gnawed beneath them. If they didn't find Emily within 48 hours, the odds plummeted. Inside, Karen sat frozen as the hours ticked away. She replayed the night over and over. Emily's giggle, her question about the rain. The faint draft she hadn't noticed. The scream she hadn't heard. Guilt pressed on her chest so hard she thought she'd suffocate. By evening, Mark slammed a fist against the wall, startling her. How could this happen in our house? In our house. His voice cracked, rage spilling into despair. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Karen reached for him, but he pulled away, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Their grief was already fracturing them. Detective Ruiz lingered in the doorway, watching, noting. He'd seen it too many times, the way abductions not only stole children but destroyed families piece by piece. Yet something in Karen's trembling persistence struck him. She wasn't letting go. She would never let go. He wrote it in his notes. Mother's will is unbreakable. She will keep this case alive even when others walk away. By the second night, exhaustion replaced adrenaline. Coffee cups littered the counter. Officers rotated shifts, scanning tips, following dead ends. The storm had washed away most evidence. The sedan sighting remained the strongest lead, but without plates or clear description, it was like chasing smoke. Karen sat by the window in Emily's room, staring out into the wet street, waiting for a miracle. She whispered prayers, bargains, promises to the darkness. Take everything else, just give her back. Mark had retreated into silence, his anger simmering beneath. And Ruiz stood outside beneath the dripping eaves, staring at the faint tire marks dissolving into mud. He vowed silently, I will not let this case go cold. Not for this child. Not for this family. But he also knew the statistics. After 48 hours, hope began to rot. And the truth about Emily Miller's disappearance would not surface for 10 long years, until a strand of DNA tore open everything they thought they knew. 10 years passed, yet the Miller house still bore the silence of that single night. The neighborhood had changed, new families, fresh coats of paint, children playing on lawns, but inside 14 Maplewood Drive, time had not moved forward in the same way. The once bustling kitchen now echoed with loneliness. Dust collected on framed photographs of Emily, 4 years old, gap-toothed grin, bright eyes frozen in a moment that never aged. On the mantel, candles had long burned out, their wax hardened and untouched. The missing posters had yellowed, curling at the edges, but Karen had never taken them down. Every anniversary, she replaced the bouquet beneath Emily's photo with fresh lilies. She marked the birthdays, baking small cakes, slicing them into neat pieces that went uneaten. The rituals were her anchor against the abyss. But the family had not survived whole. Karen now lived alone in the house, her hair streaked with gray though she was only in her 40s. Grief had hollowed her cheeks, carved fine lines at the corners of her eyes. She still taught part-time at the elementary school, but co-workers spoke of her in whispers, how she kept a photo of Emily on her desk, how she slipped out during recess to sit in her car and cry. She clung to hope with a ferocity that unsettled people. While neighbors shook their heads and murmured, "Closure," Karen snapped back, "Closure is a lie for the living. She's out there. I feel it." Her conviction cost her dearly. Mark, unable to live in the constant presence of ghosts, had moved out 5 years earlier. They separated quietly, the divorce papers signed with little ceremony. He lived 2 towns over now, remarried with a young son. Yet whenever he drove past Maplewood, his stomach twisted with guilt. He had learned to survive by letting go. Karen had survived by holding on. Detective Samuel Ruiz had not let go either, though his persistence had grown quieter, more private. In the years since Emily's disappearance, Ruiz had seen dozens of cases come and go. Promotions had passed him by, he'd refused to leave Maplewood's major crimes unit, unwilling to surrender Emily's file to someone else. His colleagues teased him about his ghost case, but Ruiz kept the box of evidence within arm's reach of his desk, reopening it late at night when the station emptied out. The box contained little: photos of Emily's bedroom window, plaster casts of tire treads, the stuffed rabbit Karen had eventually surrendered for analysis, and one lock of blonde hair, sealed and labeled, taken from the pillow that stormy night. He kept it not only because it was all they had left, but because he believed science would catch up. He'd told Karen as much at one of their annual meetings. One day, he'd promised quietly, the world will be able to read secrets this evidence is holding. We just have to wait. In the meantime, the world had moved on. Emily's name faded from headlines. The missing posters stopped appearing on telephone poles. New tragedies replaced old ones. But in Karen's heart, the search never ended. She haunted online forums for missing children, scrolling through faces, clicking possible match, whenever she found a girl with Emily's eyes or chin. She kept a box in the attic filled with news clippings, maps, letters to state officials, unanswered emails. She told herself, if I stop searching she'll be gone forever. Still, loneliness gnawed at her. Nights were the worst. She'd wake from dreams of Emily's voice, convinced she heard the patter of little feet in the hallway. Each time, the crushing silence that followed left her gasping for air. Across town, Mark tried to explain himself to his new wife, but the past hung over him like a shadow. You don't know what it's like, he muttered one night when she asked why he never spoke of Emily. Every time you hope, it breaks you again. At some point you can't keep bleeding. But the truth was he carried guilt like a second skin. He had locked the windows that night. Or thought he had. His son sometimes asked about the picture in the drawer, the little girl with the smile. Mark could barely answer. By the 10th anniversary, a vigil was held in the town square. A small crowd gathered. Neighbors, church members, former classmates of Emily who barely remembered her. They lit candles, sang softly, murmured prayers. Karen stood at the center, clutching a framed photograph. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She was 4 years old when someone took her from us. 4 years old. We don't know where she is, but I believe she's alive. If you know anything at all, please don't stay silent. Her words cut through the crowd like a blade. People shifted uneasily, guilt flickering in their eyes. But no new leads came. Ruiz stood at the back, hands folded in his coat pockets, rain dripping down his collar. He met Karen's gaze across the flickering candlelight, and in that look was an unspoken vow: we're not done yet. The world might have moved on, but the case remained alive in 3 fractured hearts. Karen, who clung to faith, Mark, who buried his shame, and Ruiz, who refused to close the file. And in a laboratory only miles away, a scientist prepared to run a new series of tests on old evidence. Within months, the results would trigger a chain reaction that shattered everything the Millers thought they knew. For in the silence of DNA strands, the past still spoke. And its voice was about to be heard. It started not with a dramatic phone call, but with a quiet click of a mouse in a sterile lab outside Trenton. Dr. Lena Patel adjusted her glasses and leaned over the screen. She'd been running routine backlog cases for the state crime lab, reprocessing old samples with the newest generation of DNA sequencing. Most files yielded nothing: degraded samples, no matches, dead ends. But when the machine returned a partial profile from the blonde hair sealed in Emily Miller's case file, Dr. Patel's pulse quickened. The profile didn't match anyone in CODIS, the national database of offenders. But cross-referenced against a growing web of genealogy databases, legally accessible when families had consented to share results, something flickered. A second cousin. Distant but real. The screen displayed the name: Jordan A. Miller, age 27, Pennsylvania. Dr. Patel straightened in her chair. Well, hello, she whispered. She wasn't reckless. She knew a second cousin wasn't proof. But it meant the DNA tied back to family. And if that was true, then the hair left on Emily's pillow the night she was taken might have belonged not to an intruder, but to someone with blood ties. She filed the report, flagged it urgent, and sent it to Maplewood PD. Detective Samuel Ruiz nearly spilled his coffee when he saw the email. 10 years of silence, then suddenly, this. He stared at the screen in his cramped office, the lab's note glowing like a flare in the dark. Familial DNA match identified. Potential lead. Recommend follow-up. He grabbed the old evidence box from his shelf, heart pounding. The lock of blonde hair, sealed tight, had been his tether all these years. Now it was speaking. Ruiz phoned Dr. Patel immediately. Walk me through it. Don't sugarcoat. Her voice was brisk but excited. The sample from the pillow produced a viable profile. Not enough for a direct match, but sufficient for kinship analysis. Our system hit on a likely second cousin in Pennsylvania. That means we may be able to map the family tree, work backward until we land on your suspect pool. Ruiz's throat tightened. So you're telling me someone related to Emily could have been in her room that night? There was a pause. Then Patel said carefully, I'm telling you this isn't random. The abductor may have been connected, by blood. Karen was in the kitchen, staring at her untouched tea when the knock came. She opened the door and froze at the sight of Ruiz, his face set, his presence electric with urgency. Her heart leapt and sank all at once. You found something. Ruiz nodded. I need you to sit down. She clutched the edge of the counter, bracing herself. Is she? No, Ruiz said quickly. No remains. No body. This is different. We have a DNA development. He explained it as gently as he could, how the hair had yielded a genetic link, how it pointed to family, how it cracked the case open after a decade of silence. Karen's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped her mug. Family? Do you mean Mark's family? Mine? We don't know yet, Ruiz admitted. But it means whoever took Emily wasn't a stranger. This wasn't random. Karen's eyes burned with fresh tears, but beneath the grief something else lit up, anger. So all this time she could have been with someone who knew us? Someone who smiled at us, sat at our table? Ruiz's silence was answer enough. When Karen phoned Mark, his reaction was sharp and defensive. That's impossible. No one in my family, no one, would do something like this. Karen's voice rose, shaking with fury. You don't know that. You weren't there that night, Mark. You don't feel it every day like I do. Mark slammed the phone down, but the words lodged deep inside him. The case moved fast now. Ruiz arranged a meeting with Dr. Patel, spread the genealogical chart across the evidence room table, and traced lines with his finger. This is our cousin match, he said. From here we build outward. The branches lead to Pennsylvania, New York, even back into Jersey. Patel nodded. With cooperation we can triangulate the likely relative pool. It will take weeks, but it can be done. Ruiz leaned back, exhaling. For 10 years, Emily's case had been cold ashes. Now the fire was back, crackling, dangerous, alive. The media caught wind within days. A leak. Headlines blared, break in 10-year-old abduction case, DNA ties evidence to family. Reporters swarmed Karen's lawn again. Microphones thrust into her face. Mrs. Miller, how do you feel knowing someone related to you may have taken Emily? She answered with ice in her voice. I don't care who they are. If they have my daughter, they will answer for it. Mark refused to comment publicly, retreating further into his private life. But in quiet moments he replayed family gatherings in his mind. Uncles, cousins, estranged brothers. Who might have had reason. Who might have slipped into the house that night. The thought twisted his gut until he felt sick. But the biggest shock came not from the Miller family tree, but from a house in Pennsylvania. There a teenage girl brushed her teeth in front of the mirror, unaware of the storm about to descend. She'd grown up believing her guardian was her only family, her life ordinary, quiet. And yet, her DNA was already whispering to strangers hundreds of miles away. Her world too was about to crack open. Her name was Rachel Carter. At least that was the name she had always known. 17 years old, a high school junior in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Brown hair that she sometimes dyed with streaks of auburn. A backpack with pins and patches, half-zipped, stuffed with overdue homework. A girl like thousands of others, blending into the cafeteria chatter, the bus rides, the hallway rush between bells. But there was something about her eyes. A brightness, an edge of distance. Teachers often said Rachel seemed older than her years. Friends said she was hard to read, like her thoughts were always partly elsewhere. She lived with her guardian, Janet Carter, in a narrow brick house on the edge of town. Janet was in her late 50s, quiet, reclusive, prone to migraines that kept her in bed for days. She never spoke of Rachel's parents except in vague terms. They couldn't take care of you. I stepped in. Rachel had learned not to press. It was easier to accept the life she'd been given than to question it. That Tuesday morning, Rachel laced her sneakers and jogged down the block to the bus stop. The September air was cool, leaves tinged with red. She pulled her hoodie tight and scrolled her phone. Headlines scrolled by without much notice until one froze her. 10 years on, DNA match reignites abduction case of Emily Miller. Rachel frowned, thumb hovering. She tapped the article. A photograph filled the screen, faded, slightly grainy. A 4-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile. Blonde hair. Wide eyes. For reasons she couldn't explain, Rachel's stomach clenched. She quickly locked her phone and shoved it in her pocket as the bus pulled up. At school the day passed in fragments. History class blurred. Math problems slipped away. She doodled spirals in the margins of her notebook instead. Her best friend Maya noticed. You good? Maya whispered during English. Rachel nodded, forcing a smile. Didn't sleep much. But inside she was buzzing. She couldn't shake the photograph. It felt familiar in a way that made no sense. At lunch, she sat at their usual table. Maya scrolled through her phone, gasping. Oh my God, look at this. That missing girl story? They think family was involved. Isn't that insane? She shoved the screen toward Rachel. Rachel's chest tightened. The headline blared again. The photo of Emily Miller stared back. She pushed the phone away with a shaky laugh. Yeah. Crazy. But her appetite was gone. That evening, she came home to find Janet sitting at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread out. Her hands trembled as she folded the page closed when Rachel walked in. Rachel froze. What's that? Nothing important, Janet said quickly, too quickly. She forced a smile. How was school? Rachel dropped her backpack by the door, her gaze narrowing. It's that girl, isn't it? The one who went missing. Janet's expression flickered. For a heartbeat, fear crossed her face, raw, unguarded. Then it was gone. Rachel, don't go chasing ghosts. It has nothing to do with us. Rachel tilted her head, studying her guardian. She'd never noticed how pale Janet looked, how sweat beaded her temple even though the room was cool. Why do you look scared? Rachel asked softly. Janet's voice sharpened. Enough. Go to your homework. Rachel retreated upstairs, but her mind reeled. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, that photo burned into her thoughts. Why did she look so familiar? Why did Janet react like that? Her phone buzzed. Another headline notification. Police pursue familial DNA in missing girl case. Her pulse pounded. For the first time in her life, Rachel wondered if the story she'd been told about her past, the story of absent parents and a selfless guardian, wasn't the whole truth. Meanwhile, in Maplewood, Detective Ruiz studied Rachel's file across his desk. Dr. Patel's chart had traced the DNA hit to Janet Carter's extended family. The guardian's name sat circled in red ink. Ruiz tapped the photograph clipped to the file. A teenage girl, unsmiling in a school portrait. His gut twisted. She looked like Karen. Not identical, not certain, but enough to stir something deep. He closed the folder slowly. Rachel Carter? He whispered. Who are you really? And across town, Karen Miller lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 10 years, her heart pounded with something she dared not name, hope. She didn't know it yet, but the girl she dreamed of every night had grown up under another name. And the truth was finally, painfully pulling them together. Janet Carter had never been one for visitors. Most of the neighbors on her block in Scranton barely knew her, though they recognized her routines. Grocery trips on Wednesdays, laundry hung neatly on Sundays, lights in the front window turned off by 9. She lived like a shadow among them, her presence unremarkable, until Rachel. People said it softened her, raising a child alone. But behind closed doors, Janet's life was a fortress of secrets. The first cracks showed when Detective Ruiz requested her records. Sitting in the Maplewood station, Ruiz flipped through a thin folder that had taken days to compile. Birth certificate, missing. Legal guardianship papers, inconsistently filed. No adoption records, no foster care trail. Just a notarized statement dated 2006, claiming she'd taken Rachel in after a family hardship. Ruiz frowned, tapping the page. Hardship, huh? Conveniently vague. Dr. Patel leaned against the doorway, sipping coffee. If the DNA is right, Rachel is tied to the Miller family. The guardian may not be who she says she is. Ruiz's pen paused. Or she may be exactly who she says, just hiding why. Meanwhile, Rachel's curiosity burned hotter. She couldn't shake the image of Janet at the table, the paper snapped shut, fear etched across her face. One evening, while Janet showered, Rachel crept into the bedroom she was rarely allowed to enter. The space was meticulous, bedspread tucked tightly, curtains drawn. She rifled through drawers, heart pounding. Receipts, old bills, neatly folded sweaters. Then, tucked under a stack of papers, she found a faded photograph. A young Janet stood beside another woman Rachel didn't recognize. Between them was a little boy with a balloon. Written on the back in smudged ink, Summer Fair 1998, with Daniel. Rachel frowned. Daniel? She'd never heard the name. Before she could dig deeper, the floor creaked in the hallway. She shoved the photo back just as Janet's voice cut through the door. Rachel? What are you doing in there? Rachel's throat tightened. Looking for my charger. The silence stretched, thick as rope. Then Janet said flatly, stay out of my room. That night, Rachel dreamed of the little girl in the news article, Emily Miller. In the dream, the girl reached out to her through rain-smeared glass, whispering something Rachel couldn't hear. She woke gasping, sweat slick on her skin, her own reflection in the mirror suddenly strange. Ruiz pressed further. He drove to Scranton, parking across from Janet's house in an unmarked car. From the window, he watched Rachel leave for school, backpack slung over one shoulder. She moved like any other teenager, earbuds in, head bobbing slightly to unheard music. But Ruiz's eyes fixed on Janet. She stepped onto the porch, glancing up and down the street like prey sniffing for hunters. The way she locked the door, double-checking, spoke volumes. Ruiz scribbled in his notebook, "Paranoia. She knows she's hiding something." Later he pulled Janet's employment records. Sparse. Odd jobs, periods of unemployment, long gaps unexplained. Nothing tying her to Scranton before 2006. But one document caught his attention. A driver's license application in New Jersey, issued the same year Emily disappeared. Ruiz's jaw clenched. She was in Jersey. At home, Rachel pushed Janet again over dinner. "Who's Daniel?" she asked, casual as she could manage. Janet's fork froze midair. For a moment, her eyes flickered, grief, guilt, panic, but then her expression hardened into stone. "You've been snooping. I just saw a photo. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Janet slammed the fork down, the clatter sharp. "Because it's none of your business. Some things are better left buried." Rachel recoiled. "You've lied to me my whole life, haven't you?" Janet's hand trembled. "Rachel, listen to me. Everything I've done was to protect you. You think you want the truth but you don't. It will destroy you." Her voice cracked on the last word. For the first time Rachel saw not anger but fear. That night, Janet sat alone in her bedroom, the photograph of Daniel clutched in her hands. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "You promised," she whispered to the faded faces. "We swore we'd keep her safe. But the past doesn't stay buried, does it?" Meanwhile, Ruiz returned to Maplewood, dropping the latest findings on his captain's desk. "She's not clean. She was in New Jersey at the time of the abduction. She took the girl, renamed her Rachel, and vanished." The captain raised an eyebrow. "You think this Carter woman is our abductor?" Ruiz tapped the file with conviction. "If she isn't, then she's protecting the one who is. Either way, Rachel is the key." But Rachel herself was unraveling. She stared at her reflection late into the night, tracing her features with trembling fingers. The curve of her chin, the shape of her nose, suddenly unfamiliar. She whispered into the dark, "Who am I?" And in Maplewood, Karen Miller clutched Emily's photograph, unaware that her daughter might already be found, living under another name, another life, another truth. The Miller home hadn't changed much since that night 10 years ago. The shutters were a little more worn, the front yard less carefully trimmed, but the porch still bore the deep grooves Daniel had carved into the rail as a teenager. To Karen, it was a house frozen in grief, every corner echoing with Emily's absence. Now, as Detective Ruiz's unmarked car pulled into the driveway, Karen stood on the porch wringing her hands, heart in her throat. She told herself to be calm, to prepare for disappointment, but her body betrayed her. She shook as though it were that stormy night all over again. The back door opened and Rachel stepped out, hesitant. She looked around, wary as if the air itself felt heavier here. Ruiz gave her a reassuring nod. "It's just a conversation. You don't have to force anything." Rachel adjusted her backpack strap. Her stomach twisted. She wanted answers, but the thought of stepping into a stranger's home, people who believed she might be theirs, was dizzying. Karen's breath hitched. The girl's posture, the way she tilted her head, it was Emily and yet not Emily. The face was familiar but older, different, touched by another life. "Rachel," Ruiz said softly, gesturing. "This is Karen Miller, Emily's mother." Karen stepped forward, voice trembling. "Hello, sweetheart." Rachel froze. She didn't know whether to hug the woman or retreat. She settled for a stiff nod. "Hi." The silence that followed was unbearable. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of cinnamon. Karen had lit a candle hours earlier in a desperate attempt to create warmth. The photographs on the mantel seemed to stare at Rachel. One in particular caught her eye, a younger version of herself, Emily, grinning in a sun hat at the beach. Rachel's breath stuttered. That's me." Karen's hand flew to her mouth. Tears brimmed instantly. "Yes, that was Emily's 6th birthday. You loved the ocean." Rachel tore her eyes away, shaking her head. "No, that's not me. That's her. I'm Rachel. I don't even like the ocean." Ruiz cleared his throat gently. "This is why we're here, to find clarity. Sometimes the heart remembers what the mind forgets." Rachel sank into the couch, arms folded. She felt like prey under a microscope. Karen sat opposite, clutching tissues, her gaze never leaving the girl. "You have your father's eyes," Karen whispered. Rachel stiffened. She'd never known her father. Janet had always dodged the question, claiming he'd been out of the picture. Something hot prickled behind her eyes. Stop looking at me like I'm a ghost you dug up. I don't know you. I don't know any of this. The front door creaked open and a man stepped in. Karen's brother, Michael, had insisted on being present. He froze when he saw Rachel. His face drained of color, and for a moment he swayed as if struck. God, he breathed. It's her. It's Emily. Rachel shot up from the couch. No. I'm not her. Stop saying that. Michael reached out, palms up, as if soothing a frightened animal. Emily, it's me, Uncle Mike. Don't you remember? I used to carry you on my shoulders. Rachel backed away, voice sharp. Don't call me that. My name is Rachel. Karen broke down, sobbing. She's alive, Michael. She's alive. Rachel clutched her temples, torn between fury and fear. The room felt suffocating, the air too thick. Detective Ruiz stepped between them, steady but firm. Enough. This is overwhelming for everyone. Rachel is here because she deserves the truth. Not to be pressured. Karen wiped her tears, trying to compose herself. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I don't mean to scare you. It's just, for 10 years I've prayed for this moment. And now you're standing here and… Rachel's voice cracked. And what? You want me to just slip back into her skin? Be your daughter again? What if I'm not? The question hung in the air like a blade. Later, Ruiz drove Rachel back toward Scranton. The car was heavy with silence. Rachel stared out the window, city lights blurring into streaks. Finally she spoke, voice small. She looked at me like she knew me. Like she's been waiting for me. Ruiz kept his eyes on the road. That's what mothers do. They wait. They hope. Rachel swallowed hard. What if they're right? What if I'm her? Ruiz hesitated. Then you have choices to make. About who you are and where you belong. But for now, all you need to do is keep asking questions. Back at the Miller house, Karen sat on the couch long after Rachel had gone, staring at the photograph on the mantel. Her tears had dried, leaving only a hollow ache. Michael paced the living room, restless. It's her, Karen? I don't care what name she goes by. That's Emily. Karen's eyes darkened, her voice steady despite the tremor. Then why does she look so afraid of us? Across town, Janet Carter sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from her. A glass of untouched water sat on the table. She whispered into the stillness. They're pulling her away from me. But they don't know. They don't know the truth. And for the first time, the mask of calm she'd worn for years cracked. The waiting room at the county forensic lab felt like a purgatory. Rachel sat hunched in a plastic chair, her backpack at her feet, headphones dangling and used around her neck. She kept her eyes glued to the scuffed tile floor, willing herself not to look at the Millers sitting across from her. Karen twisted a tissue into shreds in her hands, her knuckles white. Michael paced the corner like a caged animal. Detective Ruiz leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, trying to project calm, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. On the table sat a manila envelope, the results. Inside, rows of genetic markers, strings of data that would cut through 10 years of uncertainty. Dr. Patel entered quietly, lab coat swishing, eyes soft behind her glasses. She carried the folder as if it were a sacred text. The room hushed at once. Thank you all for your patience, she said, her voice gentle. I know this has been a long time coming. Karen half rose from her chair, trembling. Please, just tell me. Dr. Patel opened the folder, scanning the page. The DNA analysis shows with 99.98% certainty that Rachel Carter is biologically Emily Miller. The words detonated. Karen gasped, collapsing into her chair, tears streaming freely. I knew it. I knew my baby was alive. She reached across the table, hands shaking as if to touch Rachel. Rachel recoiled, heart slamming. Her chest felt like it was caving in. No, that's wrong. I'm not. Michael clapped his hands together, half laughing, half sobbing. It's her. After all these years, Emily's back. Rachel shot up, chair scraping against the floor. Stop calling me that. I'm not Emily, I'm Rachel. That test doesn't change who I am. Her voice cracked, raw with fury and fear. Ruiz raised his hands, trying to steady the storm. Everyone please. This is a lot to take in. Rachel, Emily, don't. Rachel snapped, pointing at him. Don't you start too. Her vision blurred, the room spinning. She stumbled toward the door, fighting for breath. The words 99.98% certainty pounded in her skull like a drum. Outside in the hallway, Rachel leaned against the cool wall, pressing her palms to her face. The tears came hot and fast, unbidden. She thought of Janet, her guardian, her only family, and how her hands had tucked blankets around her on sick nights, how she'd whispered stories about courage before bedtime. If Janet wasn't her mother, then what was she? A kidnapper? A savior? Both? Ruiz followed her quietly, keeping his distance. "Rachel," he said gently. She spun on him, eyes blazing. "Do you know what it feels like to have your whole life ripped away by a piece of paper? To be told you're someone else, that everything you thought you knew is a lie?" Ruiz's face softened. "I know what it's like to lose family. I know what it's like to live with ghosts. But you're not losing who you are. You're just finding out where you came from." Rachel shook her head violently. "No. Where I came from is Janet. That's my life. My memories. My everything." Her voice faltered. "So if she's a lie, then what am I?" Back in the lab, Karen clutched the tissue so tightly it tore in her fists. She whispered to Michael, "She's so angry. She doesn't want us." Michael rested a hand on her shoulder. "She's just scared. She's been raised to believe a different life. But she's ours, Karen. The test proves it." Karen's tears shimmered, equal parts joy and heartbreak. "She is ours, but she doesn't believe it. And what if she never does?" Later that night, Janet Carter sat in her kitchen, the TV flickering in the corner. The news anchor's voice cut sharp through the static. "In a stunning development, DNA evidence has confirmed that missing child Emily Miller, abducted from her Maplewood home 10 years ago, is alive and living under the name Rachel Carter." Janet's glass shattered against the floor. She sank into the chair, clutching her head. The world she'd built, the lies she'd nursed into a kind of fragile truth, were crumbling. "They'll take her from me," she whispered, rocking slightly. "They'll tear her away. And she'll never know why." Her eyes flicked to the photograph of Daniel on the mantel. Her voice broke. "I promised him. I promised I'd keep her safe." The next day, Rachel sat in her bedroom, phone buzzing with texts from classmates. "Is it true? OMG, you're that missing girl? What's it like being on the news?" She hurled the phone across the room, heart pounding. She wasn't a headline. She wasn't an experiment. She wasn't a ghost. She was Rachel. But the world was calling her Emily. And she didn't know how long she could keep the two identities from tearing her apart. Janet Carter had spent 10 years building her life around Rachel, piece by piece, lie by lie, until the story she told herself almost felt true. She had been Rachel's protector, her mother in every way that mattered. But now, with the DNA confirmation flashing across every news channel, the fragile scaffolding was collapsing. The neighbors whispered. The stares lingered when she went to the grocery store. Even the mailman looked at her differently, his smile tighter, his eyes avoiding hers. The word was out. Kidnapper. That evening, Rachel came home from school, slamming the door behind her. She stormed past the kitchen without a word, heading for her room. "Rachel," Janet called softly, stepping into the hallway. Rachel froze, her back stiff. Janet reached out, her voice pleading. "We need to talk." Rachel spun on her, eyes rimmed red from unshed tears. "What is there to talk about? Everyone knows now. They know I'm Emily. That you lied. That you stole me." The words sliced through Janet, but she forced her voice steady. "I didn't steal you. I saved you." Rachel blinked, stunned. "Saved me? From what?" Janet's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes glistened. "From a life you weren't meant to live. From people who couldn't keep you safe. From..." She stopped herself, swallowing hard. "From things you don't understand." Rachel's voice cracked. "I don't care about your excuses. You're not my mother." Janet's breath hitched, her face crumpling. For a moment she looked decades older, fragile as glass. But then something steeled in her. "You are my daughter," she whispered fiercely. "You may not remember how or why, but I will not let them take you away from me." Rachel recoiled, fear flickering in her eyes. That night, Janet sat alone at the kitchen table, a half-empty glass of whiskey sweating on the wood. She opened the drawer beside her and pulled out a small tin box. Inside were scraps of a life she tried to bury, old IDs, photographs, a folded map with notes scribbled in the margins. She traced a finger over Daniel's name scrawled in faded ink. "I promised you," she murmured to the silence. "And I don't break promises." Her gaze hardened. If the Millers thought they could simply reclaim Rachel, they were wrong. The next morning, Rachel found Janet in the driveway, her car trunk open, a duffel bag half-packed. Rachel frowned. "What are you doing?" Janet looked up, her face carefully neutral. "We're leaving, sweetheart. Just you and me. Somewhere new. Somewhere safe." Rachel's blood ran cold. "No. I'm not going anywhere with you." Janet stepped closer, her voice trembling but insistent. Rachel, listen to me. They're going to twist you, fill your head with lies about who you are. They'll rip you away from everything you know. But I won't let that happen. If we leave now, you'll understand in time. I can explain everything, everything. Rachel shook her head violently. You're scaring me. Janet's eyes brimmed. I'm scared too. I've been scared every day since I took you in. But I did it for love. Don't you see? You're mine. Rachel stepped back toward the door. No. You can't just erase 10 years of my life and expect me to run away with you. For the first time, Janet's mask cracked fully. Desperation carved her voice into something sharp and trembling. If you don't come with me, they'll destroy us both. That night, Ruiz paid Janet a visit. She opened the door cautiously, her eyes red, her hands shaking. Evening, Miss Carter, Ruiz said calmly. We need to talk about Rachel. Janet's grip on the door tightened. She's fine. She doesn't need you meddling. Ruiz tilted his head, studying her. She's confused. She needs space to figure out who she is. And you need to give it to her. Janet's laugh was hollow. Space? You mean hand her over to those people, let them rewrite her entire life? No. I won't do it. Ruiz's tone hardened. Janet, if you keep obstructing this, it will only get worse. For you. For her. The courts will get involved. Something flared in Janet's eyes, rage, grief, terror all at once. The courts don't know her. They don't know what I've done for her. You don't know what I've sacrificed. Ruiz's jaw clenched. Then help her. Don't lose her by trying to chain her down. Janet slammed the door in his face. Alone again, Janet pressed her forehead against the cool wood. Her breathing came ragged, her heart pounding like a drum. She slid down to the floor, whispering through clenched teeth. They'll never take her. Not while I'm alive. Her mind raced, threads of fear and determination knotting into a desperate plan. If she couldn't convince Rachel with love, then she would have to keep her another way. And so, as midnight cloaked the neighborhood, Janet began to move in silence, preparing for a choice that would shatter them all. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of air that made everything feel heavy and permanent. Rachel sat outside the family courtroom, hands clenched in her lap, the ticking clock on the wall drilling into her skull. On one side of her sat Karen Miller, eyes swollen from sleepless nights, clutching tissues like lifelines. On the other, Janet Carter, rigid and pale, her gaze fixed forward as though any acknowledgement of Karen would shatter her. The bailiff opened the door. Case number 14-207. Miller versus Carter. Inside, the courtroom was small, almost intimate, but the stakes were enormous. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses, peered over her files. We are here to address guardianship of Rachel Carter, also known by birth name Emily Miller. I remind both parties, this case is about the child's welfare, not punishment. But the words landed hollow. Everyone knew this was war. The Miller's attorney rose first. A tall man with polished shoes, he spoke with crisp conviction. Your Honor, the DNA evidence is indisputable. Rachel is Emily Miller, abducted from her home in Maplewood 10 years ago. Her biological mother has spent a decade grieving, believing her daughter dead. Now that Emily has been found, she belongs with her rightful family. Karen's tears streamed silently as he spoke. Then Janet's attorney stood. Shorter, sharper, with a defensive edge in her tone. Your Honor, while biology cannot be denied, it is not the only factor in this case. For 10 years, Janet Carter has raised Rachel as her daughter. She has provided stability, education, love. To uproot Rachel from the only mother she's ever known would cause lasting trauma. We ask the court to consider continuity of care, not just DNA. Janet nodded tightly, clutching her hands together. Rachel shifted uneasily. Both arguments sliced into her, tugging her in opposite directions. Then it was time for testimony. Karen took the stand first. Mrs. Miller, the attorney began gently, can you tell the court what you remember from the night your daughter disappeared? Karen's voice trembled but grew stronger as she spoke. She described tucking Emily into bed, the storm rattling the windows, waking to the open window and the empty room. Her voice cracked when she said, for 10 years I prayed every night she was alive. And when I saw her again, I knew. A mother knows her child. The courtroom was silent except for her sobs. Then Janet was called. She sat stiff in the witness chair, eyes locked on Rachel. Miss Carter, the opposing attorney asked, where were you the night Emily Miller was taken? Janet's jaw tightened. I was in New Jersey. Visiting family. Do you have proof of that? She hesitated. No. But I didn't take her that night. The attorney pressed harder. Then how do you explain having Emily in your care weeks later with no adoption records, no legal paperwork? Janet's voice wavered, then steadied. Her family abandoned her. I found her. I took her in when no one else would. I gave her love, safety, a life. Without me, she wouldn't have survived. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face twisted in anguish. You stole her life from us. The judge banged her gavel. Order. Then it was Rachel's turn. Her stomach churned as she approached the stand. She felt every eye drilling into her. Two mothers, one desperate, one grieving, both convinced she belonged to them. The judge leaned forward. Rachel, I know this is difficult. But in your own words, where do you feel you belong? Rachel's throat tightened. Words failed her at first. Then, finally, they spilled out in jagged fragments. Janet, she raised me. She's been there for me my whole life. I don't know how to just stop loving her. But, she glanced at Karen, whose face glistened with tears. But when I saw Mrs. Miller, I felt something. Like a piece of me I didn't know was missing. And I don't know what to do with that. Her voice cracked. I don't know who I am anymore. The judge's expression softened. Thank you, Rachel. The hearing stretched for hours, arguments volleyed back and forth like weapons. Continuity of care. Biological rights. Emotional bonds. Traumatic rupture. The language was clinical, but the pain behind every word was raw and human. At last, the judge raised her gavel. I will take this under advisement. A decision will be rendered in 2 weeks. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. Rachel, how does it feel to find out you're Emily Miller? Karen, do you believe you'll get custody? Janet, are you afraid of losing your daughter? Security held them back, but the frenzy was overwhelming. Rachel pressed into Ruiz's side as he guided her toward the car, his hand steady on her shoulder. Inside, she slumped against the seat, her voice a whisper. They're tearing me in two. And I don't think I can survive it. Ruiz looked at her, heart heavy. The truth hurts, Rachel. But it also heals. You just have to hold on until it does. But deep inside, Rachel feared the truth wouldn't heal anything. It might break her beyond repair. That night, Janet sat alone, staring at the empty bed where Rachel should have been. Her fists clenched, her chest heaving. They'll take her from me, she whispered into the darkness. Unless I stop them first. And in that moment, the quiet ember of desperation in her heart flared into something dangerous. The house was too quiet. For years, Janet Carter had filled every silence with routine. Morning radio humming in the kitchen, Rachel's laughter echoing down the hallway. Now the silence pressed in on her like suffocation. Rachel wasn't home. She was with Detective Ruiz, under protective watch until the custody decision. The empty chair at the kitchen table seemed to mock Janet, reminding her of everything slipping through her fingers. Janet's hands trembled as she poured herself a drink, amber liquid sloshing over the rim. She took a gulp, then another, until her throat burned. The news anchor's voice on the TV cut through the stillness. Public interest continues to mount in the case of Emily Miller, abducted as a child and discovered 10 years later living under another identity. A custody battle is underway between her biological family and longtime guardian Janet Carter. Janet hurled the glass across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards raining to the floor. Guardian, she spat. That's what they call me. Like I was just holding her until the real mother showed up. She pressed her palms against her head, rocking. They don't understand. They'll never understand. That night, Janet drove aimlessly through the dark streets of Scranton, headlights slicing through the fog. She gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles whitened. At a red light, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. The lines around her eyes were deeper, her face harder. She barely recognized herself. She whispered, I'm losing her. I can't lose her. The light turned green. She didn't move. Cars honked behind her, but she stayed frozen, trembling. Finally, she slammed her foot on the gas, tires screeching as she sped away. 2 days later, Detective Ruiz knocked on her door. She opened it slowly, her eyes bloodshot, her hair disheveled. Janet, Ruiz said carefully, we need to talk. She leaned against the doorframe, smirking bitterly. Let me guess. You're here to tell me how much better off Rachel will be with the Millers. How I should just let her go like she was never mine. Ruiz's jaw tightened. I'm here to make sure you don't do anything you'll regret. I know what this is doing to you. Janet's laugh was sharp, almost unhinged. You think you know me, detective? You don't know anything. You've never raised a child, never sacrificed every piece of yourself for someone else. Ruiz's gaze held steady. I know you love her. But love twisted by fear can turn into something dangerous. Don't let that happen. Janet slammed the door in his face, chest heaving. She leaned against it, whispering, too late. That evening she pulled out the tin box again. She scattered the contents across the table. Old photographs, scraps of paper, a lock of baby hair tied with ribbon. Her hands hovered over them as though touching sacred relics. The photo of Daniel stared back at her, his smile frozen in time. You'd understand, wouldn't you? She murmured. You'd tell me to fight for her. To keep her safe no matter the cost. Her breathing grew ragged. I won't let them erase me from her life. I won't let them take her back. She reached for the map again, the one marked with faded notes and spirals. Her finger traced the path leading out of town into the woods. A hidden place. A place no one would think to look. The next morning, Rachel found herself escorted to school by Ruiz. The stares from classmates were sharper now, whispers trailing her in the halls. That's Emily Miller, the kidnapped girl. At lunch, she sat alone, stabbing at her food. Her phone buzzed. A text. From Janet. Meet me tonight. Just us. Please. I need to explain. Rachel's throat tightened. She stared at the screen, her hands shaking. A part of her wanted to delete it, to never answer. Another part, the part still aching for the woman who raised her, couldn't look away. That night, Janet sat in her car outside Rachel's school, watching the doors. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel, her nerves electric. The text had been sent. Now all she had to do was wait. She imagined Rachel sliding into the passenger seat, the way she used to after track practice, tossing her backpack into the back and chattering about her day. She imagined driving away, just the two of them, leaving all this behind. The image grew so vivid it hurt. And as the minutes ticked by, Janet's desperation hardened into resolve. If Rachel didn't come willingly, Janet would make sure she didn't lose her. Across town, Ruiz sat at his desk, reviewing case notes. Something gnawed at him. Janet's volatility, her unraveling composure. The way she had looked at him, wild and desperate, the last time they spoke. He scribbled a note to himself. Watch Carter. Escalation imminent. But by the time he made the call to increase surveillance, Janet had already set her plan in motion. The night air was cool, mist curling across the dimly lit parking lot outside Rachel's school. The sodium lamps hummed, their pale glow casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. Janet Carter sat in her car, engine off, her breath fogging the windshield. Every muscle in her body was taut, waiting, hoping. The text she had sent, meet me tonight. Just us. Please. I need to explain. Had gone unanswered. But Janet knew Rachel. Knew her rhythms, her hesitations, the way guilt tugged at her like a hook. She would come. She had to. The minutes stretched. Janet's heart thudded painfully. Then, movement. A slim figure stepped out of the side door, backpack slung over one shoulder, head lowered. Rachel. Janet's breath caught. For a moment it felt like old times. Like any ordinary evening. But the illusion shattered when Rachel lifted her gaze and froze at the sight of the car. Rachel's stomach twisted. She had seen the message, wrestled with it all afternoon. Against her better judgment she had come, thinking maybe, just maybe, she could get closure. But now, seeing Janet's car in the shadows, she felt her pulse quicken. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Janet opened the driver's door, stepping out slowly, hands raised. Her voice trembled. Rachel. Sweetheart. Thank you for coming. Rachel took a cautious step back. I shouldn't be here. Please, Janet whispered. Just hear me out. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Rachel's chest rose and fell rapidly. They'll find out I'm gone. No one has to know, Janet said softly, inching closer. We can just talk. Like we used to. Remember those nights on the porch when you told me everything? I miss that. I miss you. Rachel's throat tightened. A flood of memories assaulted her. Bedtime stories, birthdays, quiet mornings with pancakes. For a moment she saw her mother, not her abductor. But then she remembered the DNA test, the Millers' tearful faces, the years stolen. No, Rachel said firmly, backing away. You lied to me. My real family is out there. You can't keep me anymore. Something in Janet snapped. Her hands trembled, her voice breaking. I did it for love. I gave you everything. Don't you see? They'll never understand you the way I do. They can't protect you like I can. Rachel shook her head. You don't get to decide that anymore. Janet's eyes shone with a dangerous light. Then I have no choice. She lunged. Rachel screamed, twisting as Janet grabbed her arm. The backpack slipped off her shoulder, hitting the ground with a dull thud. "Let me go," Rachel cried, struggling. "Shoo, it's okay, baby," Janet whispered frantically, trying to drag her toward the car. "It's just us now. We'll be safe." Rachel fought harder, her heel catching Janet's shin. Janet winced but tightened her grip, fueled by desperation. A voice cut through the chaos. "Janet, stop." Detective Ruiz. He sprinted across the lot, gun holstered, hand outstretched. His partner, Officer Lee, was a step behind. Janet froze, her breath ragged, Rachel still locked in her grasp. "Don't do this," Ruiz said, his voice low, steady. "Let her go. You're making it worse." Tears streamed down Janet's face. "She's all I have. Don't you see? They'll take her and erase me from her life. I can't lose her." Ruiz stepped closer, his tone firm but gentle. "You won't lose her. But if you take her now, you'll lose everything, your freedom, your chance to even see her again. Don't throw it away." Rachel whimpered, pulling weakly against Janet's grip. "Please, Mom." "Janet, just stop." The slip of words, "Mom," hit Janet like a knife and a bomb all at once. Her hold faltered, her strength wavering. For a heartbeat it seemed she might let go. But then a flash of resolve hardened her expression. With a sudden jerk, she yanked Rachel toward the car. Ruiz lunged. The struggle erupted in a blur. Rachel screamed as Ruiz tackled Janet to the ground, prying her hands free. Janet thrashed, kicking, sobbing. "No. Don't take her from me. She's mine." Rachel scrambled back, tears streaming, watching as officers restrained the woman who had raised her. Janet's cries echoed through the lot, raw and animal. "Rachel, don't let them do this. You need me. You'll always need me." Rachel covered her ears, unable to bear it. Ruiz pulled her gently to her feet, guiding her toward the squad car. "You're safe now," he murmured. But Rachel's eyes lingered on Janet, writhing on the ground, her voice breaking into incoherent sobs. "Safe." The word felt fragile, uncertain. Because nothing about this was simple. Nothing about it was over. That night, as the cruiser carried Rachel back toward the Millers' home, she stared out the window at the passing lights, her face pale. She whispered to herself, so softly no one else could hear, "She still feels like my mom." And that truth terrified her more than anything. The Miller home was warm, its walls lined with family photographs, the faint scent of cinnamon lingering in the air from Mrs. Miller's baking earlier that day. It should have been comforting. But Rachel sat on the couch like a guest in a stranger's house, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes fixed on the floor. Mrs. Miller knelt beside her, brushing Rachel's hair from her face. "Sweetheart, you're safe now. We're here. We're not going anywhere." Rachel forced a nod, but her body was rigid. She tried to take me." Mr. Miller, standing by the window, clenched his fists. "That woman will never come near you again. She'll pay for what she's done." Rachel flinched at his words. "She's not just that woman. She's my mom too. At least she was." The room fell into uneasy silence. Mrs. Miller's eyes glistened, but she forced a gentle smile. "You were stolen from us, Rachel. She lied to you, built your whole life on a crime." Rachel's voice cracked. "But she raised me. She taught me how to ride a bike. She was there for every birthday, every bad day at school. She tucked me in every night. That wasn't a lie." Mr. Miller's voice was sharp, his grief too raw to soften. "It doesn't matter what she did after. She took you. She took 10 years from us." Rachel's hands balled into fists. "I don't know how to choose between you. I didn't ask for any of this." She bolted from the couch, rushing upstairs, her door slamming shut behind her. The echo of it rattled the fragile peace of the house. In her cell at the county jail, Janet Carter sat on the cot, staring at her hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Her wrists bore faint red marks where the handcuffs had bitten into her skin during the struggle. A guard slid a tray of food through the slot. Janet didn't move. She barely blinked. Her lawyer, a weary public defender named Thomas Avery, appeared at the bars. "Miss Carter, we need to talk about your case." Janet looked up slowly, her eyes hollow. "They're painting me as a monster." Avery sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Attempted abduction after the DNA confirmation. It's serious. The DA will push hard. If we're lucky, we might negotiate a plea to reduce the sentence." Janet shook her head. "I'm not guilty. I protected her. I gave her love. That isn't a crime." Avery leaned in, lowering his voice. "Janet, listen to me. The jury won't see it that way. They'll see a woman who stole a child, lied to her, and tried to take her again after being caught. If you don't accept some responsibility, you'll lose everything, including any chance of seeing Rachel again. Janet's hands trembled as she whispered, "She called me Mom." Avery frowned. "What?" "In the parking lot," Janet said, her voice breaking. "She called me Mom even just for a second. She still needs me. She knows I'm her mother too." Avery exhaled, his expression unreadable. That's not going to help in court. But for Janet, it was the only thing keeping her alive. Detective Ruiz visited the Millers a few days later. The custody battle had been replaced with something more final: criminal charges. But Ruiz knew the hardest part wasn't over. Rachel sat at the dining table, doodling absently in a notebook. Ruiz pulled out a chair, sitting across from her. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. Rachel shrugged. "Everyone wants me to pick a side. Like it's that simple." Ruiz nodded. "It's not simple. You grew up with one life and now you're told another is yours. Anyone would feel torn." Her eyes met his, sharp and searching. "Do you think I'm crazy for missing her?" Ruiz shook his head. "No. Love doesn't vanish just because the truth hurts. It lingers even when it's complicated. Even when it's wrong." Rachel's throat tightened. "What if I can't ever feel like I belong here?" Ruiz leaned forward. "Belonging isn't about blood. It's about choice. And right now all you need to do is give yourself time. Don't let anyone rush you." Rachel blinked back tears. For the first time in days she felt understood. Upstairs, Mrs. Miller listened from the hallway, her hand pressed against the wall. Ruiz's words cut deep, reminding her that Rachel's love was still tethered to Janet. She wanted to storm in, to shout that Rachel was hers, that 10 years of loss deserved to be erased. But instead she slid down the wall, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Because she knew love couldn't be demanded. It had to be rebuilt. Back at the jail, Janet's trial date loomed. The papers called her the kidnapper mom. Talk shows debated her psychology, painting her either as a manipulative predator or a tragic, unstable woman who blurred love with control. Janet clipped every article, pinning them to the corkboard in her cell. She circled every mention of Rachel's name, whispering them like prayers. "She still loves me," she told herself. "She'll come. She'll testify. She'll save me." But deep down, a fracture was spreading inside her, a crack between the story she told herself and the reality closing in. The fracture was everywhere. In Rachel's torn heart, in the Millers' fragile reunion, in Janet's unraveling mind. And none of them knew yet how far those cracks would spread, or what would shatter first. The courthouse in downtown Scranton stood like a fortress of stone and glass, its columns rising against the gray morning sky. Reporters swarmed the steps, their microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing as if each click could capture the truth. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. The case had become national news, the stolen girl trial as the networks branded it. Some called it a tragedy. Others a grotesque crime. For Rachel it was neither and both. She sat between her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, in the gallery. Their hands clasped hers tightly as though afraid she might drift away. She wore a pale dress chosen by Mrs. Miller, her hair smoothed, but nothing could disguise the storm beneath her calm exterior. At the defense table, Janet Carter sat in a navy blouse, her hair pulled back, her eyes fixed on Rachel. The courtroom might as well have been empty. For Janet, only one person mattered. She came, Janet thought, her heart aching. She came for me. The prosecution opened with stark clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the district attorney began, his voice steady, "this is a case about a child stolen from her family and raised under a lie. The defendant, Janet Carter, abducted Emily Miller at the age of 6 and concealed her identity for a decade. When discovered, she attempted once more to remove the child from her rightful family by force. This is not love. This is control." The jury nodded solemnly. Janet's lawyer, Avery, countered with equal fervor. "Yes, Janet Carter took Emily Miller. But ask yourselves, what did she do with those years? Did she harm her? No. Did she neglect her? No. She raised her as her own, gave her love, stability, and care. She acted not out of malice but desperation. This case is not about a villain. It is about a woman who blurred the line between protection and possession." Rachel shifted uncomfortably as the words echoed in the chamber. She could feel every eye flick toward her. Witness after witness took the stand. Investigators, neighbors, psychologists. The narrative painted Janet as both criminal and caregiver, monster and mother. The courtroom became a theater of contradictions. Finally it was Rachel's turn. Her stomach churned as she walked to the stand. She glanced at her parents, Mr. Miller's jaw set, Mrs. Miller's eyes red, and then at Janet, whose gaze never wavered. The oath felt heavy as she spoke it. The prosecutor approached. Rachel. Emily, do you prefer Rachel? Her voice was barely audible. Rachel. He nodded. Rachel, can you tell the court about the night Janet Carter tried to take you from the school parking lot? Rachel swallowed hard. She texted me. She said she needed to explain. I went because I thought maybe I owed her that. But when I told her I wasn't going with her, she grabbed me. She tried to pull me into her car. The prosecutor's voice was firm. Did you want to go with her? Rachel shook her head. No. He nodded. Thank you, Rachel. No further questions. Avery rose for the cross-examination. His tone was softer, almost paternal. Rachel, he began, you've told us you lived with Janet for 10 years. Can you describe that life? Rachel hesitated. It was normal. She made me breakfast. She helped me with homework. She came to my games. Avery leaned closer. Did you ever feel unloved? Her throat tightened. No. Did she ever hurt you? Rachel's eyes darted toward Janet, then back. No. Avery's voice lowered. So when you called her Mom, was it because in your heart she was? The courtroom was silent. Every sound, the creak of benches, the scratch of a pen, faded. Rachel's lips trembled. She was my mom. But she wasn't supposed to be. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Avery nodded, stepping back. No further questions. When Rachel left the stand, she collapsed into her seat beside Mrs. Miller, who wrapped an arm around her. Rachel buried her face in her mother's shoulder, sobs shaking her frame. Across the courtroom, Janet's eyes glistened with triumph and agony. She admitted it, Janet thought. She still sees me as her mother. In closing arguments, the prosecutor hammered the danger of obsession, the illegality of Janet's actions. Love is not an excuse for abduction. Love does not justify theft of a child's life. Avery countered with human complexity. This case is not black and white. Janet Carter did wrong, yes. But she also gave Rachel 10 years of love. Do not forget the child she raised while you judged the woman before you. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Rachel spent those hours in the courthouse waiting room, pacing, biting her nails, her parents murmuring reassurances that barely reached her ears. When the jury filed back in, the air was so thick it seemed no one breathed. On the charge of kidnapping, the foreperson said, "We find the defendant guilty." On the charge of attempted abduction, guilty. Gasps filled the room. Janet's head dropped, her shoulders sagging. But when she lifted her gaze, she found Rachel's eyes. For a moment, time froze. Rachel's face was streaked with tears, torn between relief and devastation. And Janet smiled through her own tears, mouthing the words only Rachel could see. "You'll always be mine." That night, the Millers drove Rachel home. Reporters shouted questions, bulbs flashed, but all Rachel could hear was Janet's voice echoing in her mind. She sat in the back seat, staring out the window, whispering to herself, "I don't know who I am anymore." Neither her parents, nor Ruiz, nor even Janet herself could answer that. The courtroom was smaller this time, quieter, stripped of the theatrical tension of the trial. The cameras were barred from entering. Only a handful of reporters clustered outside the building, waiting to capture statements when it was over. Inside, the benches were filled with the Miller family, Janet's few remaining acquaintances, and court officials who had grown accustomed to the case. The air carried the solemn weight of finality. Rachel sat between her parents again, her dress subdued, her hair pulled into a neat braid by Mrs. Miller that morning. Her hands twisted in her lap, nails digging into her palms. At the defense table, Janet sat motionless. She looked thinner, paler, but her eyes were alert, piercing as though still clinging to something no sentence could strip away. The judge, an older man with a gravelly voice, called the court to order. "Miss Janet Carter," he intoned, "you stand convicted of the crimes of kidnapping and attempted abduction. Before I render your sentence, you have the right to speak." All eyes turned to Janet. She rose slowly, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. Her voice cracked but carried in the hushed room. "I know what I did was wrong in the eyes of the law. I took a child who wasn't mine. I lied to her. I tried to keep her even after the truth came out. But I did not take her out of hate or greed or cruelty. I took her because I loved her. Because I couldn't bear to see her suffer the way I once suffered." Her eyes found Rachel's, locking there. "I don't regret raising her. Not one day. She is my daughter whether the law says so or not. And I hope," her voice faltered, tears spilling, "I hope someday she'll understand. Rachel's breath hitched. Her parents stiffened beside her, their faces taut with anger. The judge listened in silence, then nodded gravely. "Thank you, Miss Carter." He lifted the sentencing papers. "On the charge of kidnapping, this court sentences you to 15 years in state prison. On the charge of attempted abduction, 5 years, to be served consecutively. 20 years in total." Gasps rippled through the room. Janet closed her eyes, exhaling slowly as though bracing against a storm. The gavel struck. As officers stepped forward to escort Janet out, she turned one last time toward Rachel. Their eyes met across the room. Janet's lips moved silently. "I love you." Rachel's throat constricted. She wanted to look away but she couldn't. The words pressed into her, burning. Mrs. Miller's hand tightened around her arm. "Don't look at her." But Rachel whispered back so faintly no one else heard, "I still love you too." Tears welled in her eyes as Janet disappeared through the side door, shackles clinking with each step. Outside the courthouse, the Millers faced a sea of reporters. "How do you feel about the sentencing?" one shouted. Mr. Miller's jaw clenched. "Justice was served. 20 years is fair for what she stole from us." Mrs. Miller nodded, holding Rachel protectively. "Now we can begin healing as a family." Rachel's face was pale, her eyes distant. The microphones crowded closer. "Rachel, do you feel justice was served?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. After a beat, she whispered, "I don't know." The words sent a ripple through the crowd, but she pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, refusing to say more. That night, Rachel lay awake in her new room, the one her parents had painted a soft lavender, trying to make it hers. She stared at the ceiling, the shadows shifting in the moonlight. Her mind replayed Janet's voice, the final look in her eyes, the words she mouthed. "I love you." Rachel whispered into the silence. "I don't know who I am anymore." The lavender walls, the soft bed, the photographs of a family she barely knew, they all felt foreign. The home she remembered, the life she lived, the woman she called mom, they were gone. And yet she couldn't let them go. The sentencing had ended the case. But for Rachel, the trial wasn't over. It had only just begun, inside herself. The weeks after the sentencing blurred into a haze of obligations and attempts at normalcy. The Millers filled the house with careful gestures. Fresh sheets in Rachel's room, framed photographs of her childhood years they hadn't shared, favorite foods cooked and left waiting on the table. Rachel accepted it all quietly, but inside she felt like a guest in someone else's home. School was worse. Whispers trailed her down hallways, some kids calling her the girl who got kidnapped, others pitying her with wide eyes. Teachers treated her gently, too gently, as though one wrong word might cause her to shatter. At night, when the house was quiet, she would close her eyes and hear the sound of Janet's voice, softly singing lullabies, or scolding her to do her homework, or laughing at some silly TV show they used to watch together. And then, almost against her will, she would hear her mother's voice too, Mrs. Miller's voice, hesitant but full of determination, trying to weave a bond across the gulf of years. It was as if she were two people, stitched together by secrets. One evening, a storm rolled over the neighborhood, the first spring thunderstorm of the year. Rain lashed the windows and Rachel found herself pacing the upstairs hallway. She remembered the night she was taken, though the memory was fragmentary. The window, the shadow, the whisper of her name. Her heart clenched. That night had split her life into two. Now she stood at the top of the staircase, gripping the railing, looking down at the Millers in the living room. Her father, tense but trying, adjusted the television. Her mother folded laundry with the nervous energy of someone afraid of silence. They looked up when they noticed her watching. "Want to join us?" her father asked gently. Rachel hesitated. The storm cracked above, lightning flickering through the glass. And then, slowly she descended the stairs. She sat beside her mother, who instinctively wrapped an arm around her shoulders. This time Rachel didn't pull away. Later that night, after her parents had gone to bed, Rachel sat at her desk with a blank notebook open before her. She picked up a pen and began to write. She wrote about her life with Janet, the good and the bad, the mornings with pancakes, the arguments over curfews, the quiet comfort of routine. She wrote about the Millers, the parents she barely remembered but who had searched for her for a decade, who had waited with hope in their hearts when the world told them to give up. She wrote about herself, caught between them, lost in the middle of two truths that couldn't coexist. When she finished, she read the last line aloud to the empty room. "I don't know which life is mine. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But I'm still here. And I will decide who I am." Months later, summer bloomed over the neighborhood. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass, cicadas humming in the trees. Rachel walked down the driveway carrying her backpack. She was heading to meet a friend from school, her first real friend since everything had unraveled. Her mother called after her, "Be home before dinner." The words were ordinary, almost casual, but Rachel caught the tremor of relief beneath them. Rachel turned and smiled faintly. "I will." She walked toward the street, sunlight on her face, the notebook tucked safely in her bag. The words inside were hers, unshared, private, her way of holding both halves of her story without letting either half consume her. For the first time since the sentencing, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared imagine. Not closure, not yet, but the beginning of peace. Somewhere, behind prison walls, Janet would be counting the days, whispering Rachel's name into the dark. And somewhere else, in the Miller home, a family would keep trying, awkwardly, imperfectly but with fierce determination, to build something new out of the fragments. Rachel carried both truths inside her. Not broken, not whole. Just hers. And that was enough. What moment in this heartbreaking journey struck you the most? Was it the desperate search that spanned a decade, or the shocking twist that DNA evidence finally revealed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you found this story gripping, please consider subscribing to the channel. I pour my heart into bringing you stories with suspense, emotion, and unexpected turns, and your support is what keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until the next mystery.